Our purpose today is really to look at reviewing that timed writing process, beginning to end. What should we be doing to ensure a maximum score? So I intentionally chose two different prompts that, students had trouble with. They weren't sure what to do with it. They didn't know how to proceed. And I wanted to use them as good models because, again, we have no idea what we are going to see in May, especially in light of the fact that College Board is weighing 3 different test administration styles. I don't know if you've seen any of this information at all. No. So in essence, College Board is pitching to schools they can choose 3 methods of how the test looks. Either option 1 is a traditional style. Everyone shows up in early May and takes it on paper. Option 2 has kind of flipped things between some taking it on paper and some taking it online. Those dates are later in the month, kind of mid-May to the end of May. And then option 3 is a all online administration that happens in June. I don't think option 3 will happen in this district. I don't think they are going to ask you to take that test after graduation. I think that is stupid. I think instead what we are probably likely to see is that you guys would take the test on paper in early May, and they may have an option in mid-May for people that need to take it online. That would be my guess. That's what makes sense. But you know what? Sensical things usually don't happen. So I intentionally wanted to choose some pieces like this because if they have to put together at least three completely different tests, man, it's going to really stretch them for what kinds of poems they put on there, for what the quality of it looks like. And we saw that problem last year with having to create as many different prompts as they did. Some prompts were good and some prompts just were not. So we want to look at ones that students had struggles with. And this one about the juggler, man, how many of you read the poem and just kind of went like, what am I even supposed to do with this? We're going to talk through it because I can tell you that they did get a lot of snarky, funny attempts from students where they, wanted to make jokes about a guy who juggles balls on stage. They also wanted to make lots of puns using the last couple of lines, line 21, that damn, what a show. Lots of students wanted to end their essay with, damn, what an essay. Yeah, so let's start here at the basic. Regardless of the question type, regardless of any of it, we've talked about deconstructing prompts, rewriting prompts to make sure that we fully address everything. So let's start there. How would you rewrite the charge of this prompt so that you understand it and you make sure to fully answer it? What do we have to do here?
Write about what the characteristics of the juggler.
Okay.
And, a description I guess, but it's hard to restate.
It's okay. It doesn't have to be a total restate.
Reveals about the speaker.
Reveals about what?
How the characteristics and description that is given of what the description reveals about the speaker.
Okay. So we know we have 2 parts. That's what's most important here. We always know in any of these questions, whether it's 1, 2, we've got to talk about how. It's not what. So we can't just qualify. We have to talk about how the author develops the meaning. So 1, we got to talk about the characteristics of the juggler. And 2, we got to push it to what does that conversation reveal about the speaker himself? So we've got to balance that out. 2 parts here often lead students to not addressing one at all or not addressing part of it well. And in doing that, you are going to guarantee a score that is not qualifying. If you leave off part of this, my guess is they will probably score on row B at a 2 rather than 3. Because regardless of how well the conversation is here, you didn't fully address the question. And so we just want to be careful when it's 2 parts. We have to deal with both, and we have to deal with them somewhat equally. So if I asked you, can you provide a summary of it in 1 or 2 sentences? This kind of gets to that prose meaning that we've looked at this week. How would you do that with this poem? What's the poem literally about? Don't overcomplicate it.
A juggler performance and what occurs after.
What does occur?
Well, I guess it doesn't actually occur, it's just saying if. But the speaker talks about what could possibly happen if his child.
Okay. What is the reaction of the audience? They applaud. So notice here, even in our summary, we made sure to balance. What's the juggler do? What's the audience do? Because the speaker is a part of that audience. It's going to begin to lead us there. With this prose meaning out of the way, we might be able to talk a little bit. If there's anywhere I would say like, hey, what should the prose meaning maybe include that we don't have? It's a little bit here on the audience part, but specifically on the speaker part. How does the speaker feel about this juggler? Go back to line 21. We talked about how students wanted to make the joke about it, but based on what he says, what does that tell you about his reaction? Think about times that you are moved to say, damn, what a show. Damn, what a movie. Damn, what a whatever. Is it just enjoyment? There's got to be a little bit more that's there, and we got to understand. I'll leave this a little open. There's more to it, and it's where we're going to see here how we build in a little bit of meaning. Before we move into deconstructing the poem, we do want to take the time before we go to kind of look at, is there a total meaning that you feel like the poem is beginning to address? Is there something that you can kind of put your finger on to go, I think this is a theme, or I think this is a larger meaning it's trying to get at? Anything we want to capture before we go on?
Individuality of your craft, like.
Go ahead.
Oh, like I don't know. I just see that he's like speaking. It's something like juggling, but he does it so passionately.
Yeah. There's definitely this like awe at what this guy is able to do. And especially, you hit it with like, he's just juggling. Like, it's not that special, right? How many of you can juggle? It's kind of one of those weird things of like, we think it's not a big deal, and then you try to do it and you realize you can't. And when you recognize someone who can do it really well, sometimes we're in awe of that person in that moment. Think about seemingly simple tasks that you have watched someone do that have drawn your attention, and you're kind of like, wow, like, man. And it doesn't have to be anything incredible. Sometimes it's something as simple as like when you see one of your parents do a task that you never realized they could do as easily as they can. Maybe the first time you saw your dad like just fix something at home and you never saw that side of him. Or there's tons of different pieces to it. But you kind of notice, and I think that's a really big one. This is one of those big meanings that we're going to get to. Anything else that stands out to you? All right, so let's start to break this down into how do we approach this? What do we do with this? I would suggest maybe starting to look in one of 2 ways with a poem in any sense. First, look at how it's organized. and simply ask yourself that question of what do you notice about it? We know because there is a copyright at the bottom of the page that this is a 20th century poem. Because it's 20th century, we can infer, based on our studies, it is more likely to be formalized. Older, more traditional poetry tended to fall into formalized patterns, like a sonnet. We need a certain number of lines, we need a certain rhyme scheme. There's a structure behind our choices. But when you look here, is there an inherent structure to how this poem is organized?
I found that throughout it, it's like going through the act. So at first he's talking about the balls he used,
Uh-huh.
and then later it's the which one called the broom, the plates, and all that, and then at the end, the performance is finished, and then the speaker hypothesizes what's going to happen with the judges.
So we kind of have a beginning, middle, and an end. Okay. So it's kind of, I'm going to call it prosaic. It's written as though it's a story. There's a prose behind it. Did you notice that every stanza has the same number of lines? Now you're starting to go, okay. Simple things like that are things we want to take into account, because if we know that every stanza has 6 lines, notice what he does between stanza 1 and stanza 2. That is what we call enjambment. I'll write it down. When we do not include an end stop at the end of a line, like a period, a comma, any of that, and instead we force the reader to continue. And specifically, he goes from one stanza to the other. Now, if you're looking at it and you're going, okay, does he do it in any of the other stanzas? Nope, it's just there. So it should catch our attention if we're looking at how is this organized, because we start to go, does this poem have a rhyme scheme?
Yes. Not results, grades, goals, goals. Yes.
There is. At times it does fall in and we have it present. So we notice that. Is there a certain number of syllables in each line? An easy way to tell, does it look like roughly every line ends in a close pattern? Or do you notice like big divergences in line endings? Like one line is here and the other lines are like way out here.
It's kind of the same shape. I forgot.
We get some similar shapes to how we go. But is there anything that's leaking out to you about, oh, it's a certain number, it's this, and then it's this, and then it's that? Not really. Why am I spending any kind of time talking about this? Because we should be looking at what are choices that the author is making. Because guess what? If we got to talk about how, this can play in. Why am I focused on this one line that goes from stanza 1 to stanza 2? Well, let's look at stanza 1 and the beginning of stanza 2. A ball will bounce, but less and less. It's not a light-hearted thing, resents its own resilience. Falling is what it loves, and the earth falls so in our hearts from brilliance, settles and is forgot. It takes a sky blue juggler with 5 red balls to shake our gravity up. We, in the air the balls roll round, wheel on his wheeling hands, learning the ways of lightness, alter to spheres grazing his finger ends, cling to their courses there, swinging a small heaven about his ears. Okay. What do you notice about that transition from stanza 1 to stanza 2?
It's a conclusion of the sentence.
Uh-huh. What's the idea in that sentence?
The juggler defies what should be, I guess, thought of as gravity, but I mean, the balls come back down. So.
It seems to defy gravity, right? This simple little bit hangs just enough, it seems to defy gravity. Hey, look what he did. He went from one stanza to the other with that enjambment, where in no other part does it do that. So does it seemingly almost give you that same impression of like, I can make the idea hang for a second, but oh look, it's going to come back down and we're going to end it. Notice how organization helps to play into what we're getting. But it's something that we only notice if we take the time to pay attention to organization. It's not that it's always going to be present there, but it's something to just look at before we go any further. What do you notice about some of the words in the first stanza that stand out to you? There's that resilience, But notice how he uses resilience. These balls seemingly resent their resilience. If I handed you a ball, do you feel happy or sad? I know it seems like a really stupid question, but just think about it. Just if I handed you a ball and I said, "Hey, we're not gonna read a poem today. We're just gonna play with this ball." Happy or sad? Happy. I know you would be. Come on. You can't help but do that. When you pass that big cage of balls at Walmart that's up there, you can't help but look for a second and just be like, you know what? I just want to hit one. I don't know why. But notice what he does here in this first stanza. He acknowledges that balls bounce, but then he follows it up by going less and less. You know, it's not a lighthearted thing. And you're going, oh, this is kind of antithetical to like what I would expect. Like if we're talking about bouncing ball, like, then all of a sudden we bring in this resilience thing. Yeah, balls have this resilience, but he's like, it resents it. Because he wants to give this idea of like, it takes that skill to get that ball to hang and to seemingly defy gravity. Again, this seems like a really simple thing, but it is super difficult to do. In the course of the poem, does he become more involved and does he sort of get caught up in this performance? Look at the moment that we shift. Where does that shift happen where we see that change from a more negative tone to that changing positive? Well, it's right after the enjambment. What do you do with we? Yeah. Think about it. You can't help but say it in a sing-songy, almost like childish way. We. It's right there. And so he's giving us this way to kind of guide us and lead us. And as you go on, you start to notice what we have. Where's your shift? Your definite shift, your hard shift, if you will. You probably marked it. I think, or even before that. Where's the big butt? Yeah, did you mark it? Look at where it is. It's at the start of a stanza. It's right there. But huge, giant. We've said it before. The big butt that walks down the hallway is going to catch everybody's attention. They're going to stare at it. It's the same way here in a poem. When it comes through, it's meant to catch your attention. Because he gives us this idea of this juggler defying gravity, swinging a small heaven about his ears, but a heaven is easier made of nothing at all than the earth regained. And so we get this whole bit and we make this more difficult because within that stanza, we introduce the broom, the plate, the table. It turns from juggling to balancing. And it becomes this thing of not only can we defy gravity with that, but look, we can take these other things. We can do these things that are seemingly impossible. And it throws him for a loop. He's like, man, damn, what a show. That was awesome. But was it really anything? This guy's juggling. You ever been out in public and, back when we used to be able to be out in public and be in large groups, and you'd like walk through a square, or you might be on vacation somewhere, and there would be a street performer that would just kind of set up. Some people might pay attention to them. Most people kind of walk by, but they might be doing something. And they manage to gather a crowd or get people interested. And it's not that they're doing anything amazing, but it's in that moment. You kind of get caught up and you're like, whoa, that's really cool. Way to go. Here, this guy has this moment that catches him. And so notice that by the end of it, right? What do we do with that last line?
The juggler was defied gravity and defied what people would believe is like, oh, it's just like juggling, like you're saying, it catches people's attention. This is more than what you would expect.
Yeah. And in that moment, he defies gravity with the balls. He defies gravity with the broom, with the plate, table. We get it. What else in that moment have people been able to do? They get caught up. Seemingly simple, yeah, but notice who has won for once over the world's weight. There's a literal to it, but tell me about the figurative. What's the weight of the world that you hold and that you carry? Yep, your responsibilities, your jobs, your concerns, your worries, your things like that. If you're getting all inside of your head, are you going to be saying we? Nope. But does this guy, is he able to kind of lose himself in this moment and enjoy himself and kind of put those weights off to the side? So notice in this moment, the juggler is able to do it. We notice the individuality of his craft, absolutely. But he's also able to relieve this guy, and he only notices it after. Once that burden comes back, you kind of go, oh, well, at least I had a minute to relax. Do you feel a little bit better about how we could approach this? For the sake of time, I want to show you a couple of resources that could be available, that you can find very easily, very simply, that could help you if you want to kind of look at, okay, how could I put this together? What are some things that, could help me in a testing situation? Come on. So 2 websites really quick. One, there's an old man. And when I say old man, like this poor guy hobbles his way to the AP Institutes where he teaches in the summers. He is a wonderful teacher, but he is old. His name's Jerry Brown, and he has like one of the best websites for like teachers because he just dumps a ton of resources on there and we can just steal from him. Good old Jerry goes and grades AP essays, and he takes all of the samples that he can get his hands on and he puts them online so that we can be able to share them with students. So in 2016, when this was on the test, he was able to get his hands on a lot of student samples, which included one example for every scoring point on this old rubric. So if you went to Jerry's website, I typed in AP Lit the Juggler, and boom, Jerry's website popped up with these student samples. Here he's got really good student samples that show you how could you write this essay over this poem. And so there's some great things here if you're looking for like, I need some tangible examples. Now this is on the old rubric. So if you're going to look anywhere, look at a 7, an 8, a 9. Those are more equivalent to getting a 3 or a 4 on row B. A 6 is the lowest score I would look at. But you got some good examples here. Another page that came up comes from someone else who has gone and done AP reading. So this woman put together, hey, I read this question, what did I notice? And so she said, hey, what did students do well with writing this essay overall? They took advantage of multiple entry points that are in the poem. They didn't feel like, oh, there's only one way to talk about this. They talked about literal and figurative meaning, kind of like we did. And they were able to identify devices. She said where students didn't do so great is they didn't always support their analysis with evidence. They might make a point and just leave it there. They didn't answer all the points of the prompt. They focused on one dimension of the poem. Maybe all they could talk about was this guy juggling balls, but they couldn't really talk about what to do with some of the stuff towards the end. Or they might have talked about what a great show it was, but they weren't able to make the connection to why does it matter to this speaker? And then students also, had a hard time. They could point out the poetic device, but they couldn't talk about the function of it. They couldn't get to that how. They just were kind of doing what. In terms of what she had to say about how to organize essays, she followed up what we have said all year, that students that talked about devices as their organizing principle did not score higher than a 6 out of 9. That on our rubric would tell you that students can't score above a 3 on row B if all you're doing is organizing by device. And we have said this, it limits your conversation. You can't talk about depth if all you're doing is looking at it in one way. She said instead, go one of two ways. One, organize by stanza. You pointed out it's a very prosaic piece. It tells a story. How does that story develop by stanza? Or, she said, focus on insights. So our idea about the skill of the juggler, that individuality of craft, use that to build one paragraph to be able to show us how is the juggler described in that way and how does it help us to understand the speaker's reaction. Great tips that are here, great things that she had to say. So this again is a resource that you could absolutely pull up if you're kind of like, I really want to look a little bit more here with this. Now, there is the second prompt that we got. Let's flip and look at it quickly, and we'll kind of look at it together. I wanted to choose a prompt that was a pre-20th century prompt that students had a real hard time figuring out what to do with. And so this is a Nathaniel Hawthorne prompt. If you're going Hawthorne, did you read the Scarlet Letter last year? No. He wrote the Scarlet Letter. He wrote lots of other pieces within there. Very traditional romantic writer. And so here in this one, he focuses on two characters who have been living on the Blythedale farm, a community designed to promote an ideal of equality achieved through communal rural living. Notice that that phrase, that summary of the text is provided to you here between your M dashes. This is important to understanding the context of the prompt. At no point did they define what Blythedale is, why these two characters know each other, but it's important in understanding one of the central contrasts. Notice what they say here. This community is focused on equality for all through communal rural living. So do they have much? Take a look at the very beginning of this passage. These are two characters who have come back together. They used to be there. And so your task is to talk about how the author portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia, this woman. Her manner bewildered me. Literally, moreover, I was dazzled by the brilliancy of the room. A chandelier hung down in the center, glowing with I know not how many lights. There were separate lamps also on 2 or 3 tables and on marble brackets, adding their white radiance to that of the chandelier. The furniture was exceedingly rich, fresh from our old farmhouse with its homely board and benches in the dining room and a few wicker chairs in the best parlor. It struck me that here was the fulfillment of every fantasy of an imagination, reveling in various methods of costly self-indulgence and splendid ease. Let's stop there. What do you notice?
So this guy's coming back from, like going back to the new place?
Well, we don't worry about where he's going. They're going to part ways. But what do you notice about his descriptions about Zenobia and where they are?
He's astonished.
At what?
Not her, but of, I guess where they're in what used to be like a barn is now like this really, expensive and lavish place.
Notice the details, the expense, the lavishness. This is juxtaposed against what these two characters know. Think about when you come together with somebody that you used to know in a different setting and they've changed. You're going to notice that change because of what you were used to together. And so here she has gone from this rural community that was all about equality to richness and lavishness. That juxtaposition is important. And so as you start to go on, you notice that juxtaposition is all about this, being able to see what this person is versus what's expected or what we know. Let's see where she finally speaks. Okay, go to the very bottom. This would be line 46, the end of the first column, where Zenobia actually speaks. Just listen to her voice. It's not so to me. I should think it a poor and meager nature that is capable of but one set of forms and must convert all the past into a dream, merely because the present happens to be unlike it. Why should we be content with our homely life of a few months past to the exclusion of all other models? It was good, but there are other lives as good or better. Not, you will understand, that I condemn those who give themselves up to it more entirely than I, for myself, should deem it wise to do. Is this the kind of voice that you would expect from a 19th century woman?
No, she seems very upfront, forward.
Yeah,
It's not normal.
exactly. So we notice again juxtaposing. She is very different than your traditional woman. And so when we look at how we're supposed to see this, and you go back and you kind of look, notice the attitude towards her. We get presented with these juxtapositions, but then when the narrator actually gets the chance to speak, we see his disdain for it. He is not happy with the changes that have happened in these juxtaposed ideals. And so when we look at this prose piece, we can follow a similar model here to kind of pull it apart and go, hey, what do we notice? So keep in mind as we get to our mock next week, some things to keep in mind. One, make sure that you take the time to either rewrite the prompt or deconstruct the prompt. Two, give yourself a chance to write a quick summary just to get it out of the way and to see the difference between what's the summary and what's the total meaning. Then as we start to pull it apart, look for the big chunks, whether those are by organized ideal, paragraph, or stanza, whether they're by big concept, or even if you go as simply as I'm going to write 3 sentences, beginning of passage, middle of passage, end of passage, so that you can show the development of the idea. Those are some of the big tips that I would have. Lastly, your thesis should be definite. Don't just parrot the prompt. Use adjectives and descriptions and definite answers to be able to drive your analysis to a place of depth. We will start with essays Monday. We will do question 1, question 2, question 3 as we go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday and Friday are the multiple choice sections. Those will be through AP Classroom. Okay. Yay.